The database entry was 6 lines long. That was all. 6 lines to erase a person, classified personnel file, Department of Defense, access level top secret/SCI, operator designation NH7, name Captain Maya Reeves, unit Ghost Hawk Intelligence Cell, specialty signals intelligence, cryptographic operations, status killed in action, April 14th, 2019, file sealed, identity redacted, no further information available. 6 lines. And then the screen went dark. Fort Carson, Colorado, present day. The sun had not yet cleared the Rockies. The sky above the parade ground was the color of cold iron pressed flat against the peaks to the west. A handful of security lights buzzed along the perimeter fence, casting long yellow shadows across empty concrete. The base was waking slowly, the way military bases always do before dawn, not with noise, but with the quiet movement of people who had trained themselves to exist without disturbing the air around them. She walked across the parade ground alone, 5 feet 4 inches, dark brown hair pulled tight against her skull. She moved at a pace that was neither fast nor slow, the pace of someone who had learned long ago that urgency announces itself, and she had no interest in announcing anything. Her uniform was pressed. Her boots were clean. Her face gave nothing away. She did not look at the mountains. She did not look at anything in particular. She just walked, hands loose at her sides, eyes straight ahead, breathing the cold Colorado morning in through her nose and out through her mouth. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The rhythm of a person who had learned to keep their heartbeat somewhere quiet and unreachable no matter what was happening on the outside. Her name, according to her personnel file, was Captain Maya Reeves, intelligence analyst, liaison officer temporarily assigned to Fort Carson for a joint training rotation. Prior postings: Fort Bragg-Ramstein Air Base in Germany. No combat deployments listed, no field operations, no advanced training of any kind. A desk officer, a paper pusher, a woman who had spent her career moving information from one folder to another and calling it service. That was what the file said. The file was wrong about almost everything. But no one at Fort Carson knew that yet. Commander Cole Harmon was 29 years old, which made him the youngest SEAL liaison officer the base had seen in a decade. He had the kind of lean, watchful quality that certain men develop when they spend their formative years in environments that punish inattention. Not large, not loud, just consistently quietly alert the way a hunting dog is alert, not with obvious tension, but with a stillness that could become motion in a fraction of a second. He was standing at the window of the East Barracks when Maya crossed the parade ground. He had been awake since 400, which was normal for him. He was holding a cup of coffee he had not yet drunk, which was also normal. He drank coffee the way some people collected books he liked, having it near him more than he liked consuming it. He watched her walk. Something about her pace caught his attention. Not the speed of it, the quality, the way she covered ground without seeming to try, the way her eyes moved, not darting, not scanning nervously, but slowly and completely, the way a person moves their eyes when they are doing it on purpose. Cataloging, recording, processing the geometry of a space they intend to understand fully before they need to use it. He had seen that kind of attention before, in specific people, in specific places. He filed it away without commenting on it, even to himself. You do not name what you are seeing until you know what you are seeing. Naming things too early makes you stop looking. Sergeant Major Frank Kellner appeared at his shoulder the way older soldiers often do, without announcing themselves, as though they had simply materialized from the wall. Kellner was 58 years old, 32 years in uniform. He had the face of a man who had been compressed by experience, not diminished, but densified the way certain types of wood become harder the more pressure they absorb. He had been at Fort Carson for 11 years. He knew every person on this base, and he knew the difference between the ones who belonged and the ones who had been placed. Denton assigned her here, Kellner said. It was not a question. He already knew the answer. Harmon nodded without turning from the window. Rotation came through 2 days ago. Paperwork looked standard. Kellner was quiet for a moment. He watched Maya disappear through the door of the South Barracks. Paperwork always looks standard, he said. That's what it's for. He left without another word. Colonel Marcus Denton had a photograph on the wall of his office that most visitors did not notice. In the lower left corner, small frame slightly tilted. A younger man in field gear somewhere desert brown and featureless. Ranger tab on the left shoulder. Combat infantryman badge on the chest. Not shaking anyone's hand, not receiving anything. Just standing in the sun, squinting into the camera with the particular expression of someone who has just come back from somewhere difficult and is not yet sure how to stand in normal light again. That man and the Colonel Marcus Denton of today were technically the same person. Something had happened between then and now. He had been a good officer once. Not a perfect one. Nobody who actually served was perfect, but a committed one. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. He had made calls that cost lives. He had made calls that saved them. He had carried both in the same body the way soldiers do, trying to let the weight of one offset the weight of the other. And then 4 years ago, a phone call, a voice he did not recognize speaking from a number that traced to nothing. Almost friendly, explaining with the patient tone of someone presenting a business arrangement that certain events from Fallujah in 2005 had been documented, that this documentation was thorough, that it would not remain private unless Denton was willing to make certain decisions, small ones at first, to ensure its continued privacy. Denton had said nothing for a long time. Then he had said, "What do you need?" He told himself it was a single decision, one accommodation. He told himself this for a long time, and eventually he stopped telling himself anything, because there had been 3 more calls after the first and 3 more after that, and the arrangement had grown the way such arrangements always grow incrementally, each step small enough to seem almost reasonable until you look back and realize you cannot see where you started anymore. The name on the other end of those calls was Victor Sorokin. 4 days ago, a message from Sorokin's network had arrived on Denton's private line. Brief, clear. Ghost Hawk has an active operator at Fort Carson. You know what happens if this surfaces. Handle it. Denton had sat with that message for 6 hours. Then he made the kind of decision frightened people make when they feel the walls moving and reactive, impulsive, driven more by the need to act than by any clear strategy. He would make her disappear. Not physically, professionally. He would make her small, make her a failure. Erase her before she could ask questions, before anyone paid attention to why she was there. He was very good at making people small. He did not know that she was counting on exactly that. The formation assembled at 0600 on the main parade ground. 60 officers and trainees, breath misting in the cold. The mountains to the west were just becoming visible, their outline hardening against the pale sky. Denton descended from the platform with the measured deliberateness of a man who wants everyone to watch him walk. He moved through the rows with the ownership of someone surveying territory, and the rows adjusted slightly as he passed, not retreating exactly, just making space the way people do around certain kinds of authority. He stopped in front of Maya. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. The silence was a tool, and he used it with practiced economy. "Captain Reeves." "Sir." "Is that grease on your PT shirt?" Not a question. There was a small dark mark barely visible in the dim pre-dawn light on the lower left hem of her gray training shirt. She might have gotten it from the equipment room. She might have gotten it from a dozen ordinary sources. Denton said, "This is what happens when we lower our standards." He let that sit. He looked at the formation over his shoulder, making sure they were all receiving the lesson. Corporal Thorne, Garrett Thorne, stepped forward from the second row. He was large in the way that certain men are large, not just tall, but wide constructed, of the kind of muscle that comes from years of deliberate physical effort. He had played college football. He carried the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being the biggest person in a room, and he had been grinning faintly since the moment Denton called Maya's name. "Sir, inspect the captain's undershirt. Verify it meets regulation." The formation went still, not with disapproval, with the particular stillness of people who sense that something is happening and are waiting to see how it resolves. Thorne moved behind Maya. She did not turn. She did not tense. She stood with her hands loose at her sides and her feet at shoulder width and her eyes straight ahead, and she breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. 4 counts. 4 counts, as though none of this was touching her, as though she had been in places where this would have felt like relief. Harmon, standing in the back row, watched her hands. A person who is genuinely frightened or genuinely angry betrays it in their hands. The fingers close. The tendons in the wrists stand up. The knuckles lose color. These responses happen below the level of conscious control. Maya's hands did not change. Thorne grabbed the back of her collar. "This will only take a second, ma'am." Then he pulled. The sound of tearing fabric was very loud in the morning quiet. The shirt split from neckline downward, the seam giving way all at once, and the cold Colorado air hit Maya's exposed back as the torn fabric fell away to either side. For a half second, no one made a sound. Then the gasp started. Not from the humiliation, though the humiliation was plain. From what was revealed. Ink. dark and precise and enormous, covering her back from shoulder blade to shoulder blade. A bird of prey with its wings fully extended, each feather rendered in careful detail, the shading done with the kind of patience that takes hours per square inch. The bird's beak was sharp. Its talons were curled. At the center of its chest, small text. At the base of each wing, more text in the same careful hand. This was not the work of a walk-in shop on a Friday night. This was art that carried meaning. The kind of meaning that most people in that formation did not have the context to read. The laughter started somewhere in the middle rows and spread outward. "That's one serious bird," someone muttered. A louder voice, "Did she get that at a zoo?" Denton stepped back. He crossed his arms. The satisfied expression of a man who has done exactly what he meant to do settled across his face. "Well, I must say that is impressive. In a certain light." He tilted his head, studying the tattoo with exaggerated consideration. "Tell me, Captain, what does it say? Something inspirational, I'm sure." More laughter. Lieutenant Fletcher Dane from the Signal Corps said, "Looks like one of those wannabe operator tattoos, sir. The kind people get when they watch too many movies." Denton nodded with mock thoughtfulness. "The Warrior Cosplay Special usually comes with a CrossFit membership and strong opinions about tactical gear." He turned to the formation. "Let this be a lesson. You can dress yourself up, you can put ink on every inch of your skin, but you cannot fake what actually matters." He looked back at Maya. "Get yourself a new shirt, Captain, and next time try covering the artwork. This is a military installation, not a tattoo convention." He waved one hand dismissive, already moving on. "Dismissed." Maya exhaled, slow, controlled. She turned without hurry, holding the torn fabric against her chest, and walked toward the barracks. Her back was straight, her pace was unchanged. She did not look at anyone as she passed. In the back row, Harmon watched her go. In the back row, Kellner watched her go. When Thorne grabbed her collar, she did not flinch. She did not pull away. She simply stood and breathed and waited for it to be finished. The way a person stands who has learned that the body is just a container and what matters is what you keep inside it. Kellner had seen that stillness before, in returned POWs, in operators who had been through SERE training, in people who had been captured and subjected to controlled stress until they either broke or found something beneath the breaking point that held. He folded his hands behind his back and walked away without a word. The bathroom at the end of the South Barracks corridor had one cracked mirror and two flickering fluorescent lights. Maya stood in front of the mirror and looked at her own reflection for a long time. The torn shirt hung from her shoulders like something discarded. She reached into her left cargo pocket and took out a coin. It was roughly the size of a $50 worn smooth from handling. The metal had lost its original finish in most places, rubbed down to a pale gray by years of contact with the same thumb, the same pocket, the same deliberate attention. On one face, an embossed bird wing spread, head turned to the left, talons open. On the other face, a serial number and 3 names. She ran her thumb across those names. She did this slowly, in the way you touch something you are afraid might not still be there. Then she said them aloud. She said them quietly, without ceremony, in the way that people say the names of the dead when they are alone, not performing grief, just keeping the names alive in the air for a moment. Returning them to the world briefly, the way you might light a candle in a dark room, not because it changes anything, but because the act of lighting it is itself a form of resistance. "Riley," she said. "Ashford." Drummond. For a long moment, her face was not controlled, not composed or professional or blank. It was the face of a person who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and is standing in the one place where she does not have to pretend otherwise. Not anger. Anger would have been easier. Just exhaustion. The particular kind that lives in the bones. She stood with it. She let it exist. She breathed it in 4 counts, and she breathed it out 4 counts, and after a while the exhaustion was still there, but it had moved from the front of her chest to somewhere deeper, somewhere she could carry it again without it showing. She put the coin back in her pocket. She pulled a clean shirt from her kit bag, dressed, tucked it in. She had work to do. The kill house sat at the eastern edge of the training area, deliberately featureless. Just concrete walls, a roof, and a series of heavy doors. Inside, a maze of rooms designed to be rearranged depending on the training scenario. The walls bore the marks of years of simunition rounds, the paint chipped and pockmarked. Denton made the announcement at the morning briefing with the specific pleasure of someone constructing a lesson. "Captain Reeves, you'll be joining Bravo team for this morning's CQB training. Live fire exercise, kill house drill. Since you've expressed such determination to contribute to this rotation, here is your opportunity. He smiled. Your equipment has been arranged. Report to range control at 0800. Maya's equipment was waiting on a bench. She picked up the rifle first, ran her hand along the rail, checked the optic mounting, then brought the stock to her shoulder and acquired a point of aim on the far wall. She adjusted her grip a quarter inch to the left. Nobody watching would have understood what she was doing. What she was actually doing was measuring the discrepancy between where the iron sights pointed and where the muzzle axis sat, off by nearly 3 degrees right, enough to matter at training distances. She set the rifle down without comment, tried the vest 2 sizes too large, cinched what she could. The earpiece hissed with static before she switched it on. She put it in anyway. Staff Sergeant Webb, the team leader, pulled her aside before the brief. Captain, I need to be direct with you. This is not a drill designed for liaison officers. If you're not comfortable with live fire CQB, at this pace there is no shame in observing from the booth. I'll manage, Maya said. Webb looked at her for a moment, then nodded. Rear security, stay behind the stack. Don't cross a threshold until we've cleared it. The buzzer sounded. The team moved in the way experienced soldiers move, not dramatically, but with the quiet efficiency of bodies that have absorbed a skill until it lives below thought. Maya took position at the rear rifle at low ready, breathing steady. First room, 2 threat targets, neutralized inside 4 seconds. Second room, the team hit the threshold fast. A hidden threat target appeared in the corner. The breach angle did not cover, and directly behind it, overlapping in the lead man's line of fire, was a hostage target. At 15 feet, a round that missed by an inch would hit the hostage. He froze. Hold, Webb called. Reposition. Maya had already moved. 2 steps lateral to the right, changing her angle, opening a window of clear background behind the threat. She pressed the trigger with the specific patience of someone who knows that speed and haste are not the same thing, and the round arrived exactly where she intended. The threat target fell. Third room, 4 targets, 2 hostages, tight geometry. Maya dropped to one knee, lowering her profile, creating a firing solution from a position the standing team members couldn't use. 2 shots, 2 threat targets, hostages untouched. The range officer's voice crackled over the intercom. Clear, time 47 seconds, new facility record. A pause. Previous record was 52 seconds, held by a SEAL instructor. Nobody moved. Maya ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, set the rifle on the bench with the care of someone who treats equipment the same way regardless of who was watching. Practice, she said. She walked to the exit. In the observation booth, Harmon asked the technician to rewind the footage. He watched it twice, then again at half speed. He watched Maya's footwork on the second room, the lateral movement, the way she indexed off the door frame, the angle of her head through the trigger press. Kellner appeared at his shoulder. Harmon said, that corner technique, that's JSOC Advanced CQB, the specific indexing method. That course is reserved for Tier 1 operators, hostage rescue personnel. Kellner nodded slowly. The sight compensation, Harmon continued. She knew the optic was off before she fired the first round. She didn't test fire. She adjusted by feel from the way the gun sat in her hands. That means she knows her equipment the way you know it after years of running the same drills in conditions where getting it wrong has consequences. Her file, Kellner said. Intelligence analyst. No advanced weapons training listed. No CQB qualification. No combat deployments. Then either the file is wrong, Kellner said, or someone made sure it would look that way. Harmon pulled out his phone. He opened the classified personnel database. He typed 2 words into the search field. Ghost Hawk. The results loaded slowly. Ghost Hawk Intelligence Cell, operational period 2017 to 2019. Theater, Syria and Iraq. Mission type covert, reconnaissance, signals, intelligence, direct action when authorized. Unit composition redacted. Operational records sealed. Operator NH7. Call sign Night Andromeda 7. Specialty signals, intelligence, cryptographic operations. Status killed in action, April 14, 2019. Body unrecovered. Death listed as presumed. Harmon lowered the phone. He looked out through the observation booth window. Maya was alone now on the range, moving along the shooting line, collecting her spent brass casings. She arranged 3 of them on the concrete surface briefly in a small triangle. Then she scattered them with her boot, as though catching herself doing something she had decided to stop. He watched her straighten, pick up her kit bag, and walk toward the door without looking back. The file said she was dead. The file was wrong. He didn't know yet what that meant. But he knew one thing with the quiet certainty that comes from recognition rather than deduction. The woman who had just broken a facility record with a defective weapon, who had moved through a live fire drill with the footwork of someone trained by the most elite unit in the American military, who had stood on a parade ground that morning and let a man tear her shirt without flinching, that woman was not a desk officer. That woman had been somewhere, had done something, had seen things that left marks the kind that do not appear in files. He closed the database and went to find Kellner. Word travels on a military base the way weather travels across open ground, fast, low, and without asking permission. By the time Bravo team had returned their weapons to the armory, the story of the Kill House drill had already moved through 3 separate units. By lunch, it had reached the Signal Corps, the administrative wing, and the senior NCO quarters. By late afternoon, it had acquired the particular quality that stories acquire when they travel far from their origin. The details grew sharper, the central fact remaining constant even as the interpretation shifted, depending on who was telling it. In the corner of the mess hall where Lieutenant Fletcher Dane held informal court most evenings, the explanation was already constructed. She had known the drill plan in advance. Insider information. That made sense. That fit the shape of things. Dane filed Maya Reeves in the cheating category without much deliberation and moved on. At a table near the far wall, Garrett Thorne ate his dinner slowly. He had not spoken much since the drill. He was thinking about the second room in the kill house, the 2 lateral steps, the single shot, the economy of it. He was also thinking about the parade ground that morning, about the fact that when he grabbed her collar, she hadn't moved at all. He pushed his tray aside and had looked at the far wall for a while, and he did not feel good about any of it, and when he went to bed that night, he did not sleep well. The obstacle course ran along the northern edge of the training area. Private Tate Hollis was 20 years old and from a small town in central Ohio, and he had the quality that certain young soldiers have of trying too hard in ways that were visible and slightly painful to witness. The wall climb was 12 feet of vertical timber. Hollis went up fast because fast was the only strategy he had thus far developed for closing the gap between ambition and ability. He reached the top, grabbed the platform edge, and in the half-second of transition from climbing to standing, his left hand found the exact section where morning frost had collected and not yet burned off. His hand slipped. The fall was abrupt and immediate and completely without grace. 12 feet ending on packed gravel, his left leg absorbing the impact at an angle that leg bones are not designed to absorb. The sound was loud and wrong. Hollis made a single short sound, and then the pain arrived fully, and then he made a longer one, and the people nearest to him stopped when they saw the angle of his leg and the white showing through broken skin. Someone shouted for a medic. The medic was 300 yards away. Response time by the most optimistic estimate was 5 minutes. Maya was there before anyone registered she had moved. She dropped to her knees beside him on the gravel, and she put herself in Hollis's line of sight, close and direct, and she said his name once. He looked at her. His eyes were wild with pain and the first edge of shock. "Breathe with me. 4 counts in." She demonstrated. He tried to follow, his breathing ragged and uneven. 4 counts out. His breathing steadied, not fully but enough. The panic in his eyes retreated slightly. Maya had already opened the kit from her left cargo pocket. She pulled on nitrile gloves and set to work with the efficiency of someone who has done this before in conditions where the margin for error was 0. The glove wrapper landed in the gravel. The lot number on the label read 2018. These gloves had not come from any supply room on this base. They had been in a personal kit for 6 years, carried by someone who operated in places where supply rooms were not part of the landscape. Nobody around her was looking at the glove wrapper. Kellner was. He had arrived at the edge of the crowd quietly, and he was watching Maya's hands, and he was watching the wrapper, and he was filing information with the patient thoroughness of a man who knew that context only becomes clear when you collect enough of it. Maya packed the wound, applied pressure, splinted the leg. She talked while she worked, her voice clinical and calm. The human body can lose about 15% of its blood volume before shock becomes a serious problem. You're at maybe 8%. You're okay. You're going to be okay. She pulled out a radio, not the standard training radio on her belt, something smaller, differently configured. The kind of hardware that required specific authorizations to carry, which were not included in the equipment manifest for a liaison officer. She keyed the transmitter. "This is NATO training actual. I need immediate medical evacuation. 1 casualty. Compound fracture left tibia and fibula. Hemorrhage controlled. Patient stable, requires surgical intervention within 30 minutes. She delivered all 9 lines of the standard medevac request format in the exact sequence, and with the precision that the format requires a sequence that takes time to memorize practice, to deliver cleanly and live experience to deliver cleanly under pressure. The helicopter arrived in 7 minutes. The lead paramedic jumped from the bird before the skids were fully down, moved to Hollis, assessed the stabilization, and looked up at Maya. "Who did this?" Someone pointed. He studied the gauze, packing the splint placement, the pressure points. The way a craftsman studies another craftsman's work. "Textbook tactical combat casualty care," he said. "Better than textbook. Where did you train?" Maya stripped off the bloody gloves and stood. "He did the hard part," she said. "He kept breathing." She walked away before the paramedic could ask again. Kellner picked up the glove wrapper from the gravel after the crowd had dispersed. He turned it over in his hands. "Read the lot number." Folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket. Then he went to find Harmon. 2018, Kellner said, handing over the wrapper. Harmon looked at it. "She's been carrying personal trauma supplies for 6 years. At minimum. Tactical combat casualty care. That's not a weekend course. That's what they teach special operations personnel who operate where conventional medical support doesn't exist." He paused. And the 9 lines, she delivered it clean. No hesitation, no reference, perfect sequence. You don't do that from memory unless you've called in real medevacs before. Under fire, more than once. "We keep watching," Kellner said, "and we keep it between us." The communications center was windowless, climate-controlled, and slightly cold, in the way that rooms full of running equipment are always slightly cold. Specialist Vega, the base's primary cryptographer, had been ill since the previous night, the kind of illness that is complete and undignified and leaves no room for professional duty. He was in the base medical clinic. His replacement had been requested from headquarters. Arrival time 45 minutes. An encrypted message from a forward operating unit in Poland had arrived 19 minutes ago. It contained targeting coordinates for a live-fire drone exercise scheduled to begin in 40 minutes. If the coordinates were not decoded and transmitted within 20 minutes, the window would close. The exercise would be scrubbed, and several very senior people would have opinions about it. Denton surveyed the room and made a decision. He summoned Maya. She arrived 2 minutes later. The room was full, signals officers, technicians, Dane near the back wall with his arms folded. Denton gestured toward the monitor displaying the encrypted text. "Specialist Vega is incapacitated. You're the senior intelligence officer present. This message needs decoding. We have 20 minutes. Can you handle it?" He said the last 4 words the way you ask someone if they can handle a physical object you expect them to drop. Maya looked at the screen. Blocks of letters and numbers arranged in the specific visual pattern of a rotary cipher with a variable key, not the most complex system in use, but one that required genuine familiarity with cryptographic principles to unpack quickly. Not from a manual, from experience. "I can try," she said. Denton left. Dane unfolded his arms. "Captain, if you need assistance." Maya had pulled a chair to the workstation and was writing. Not typing. Writing with a pen and paper from the notepad beside the terminal in deliberate longhand. She said almost to herself, "Caesar variant rotating, key timestamp seed." Dane frowned. "What?" She didn't answer. Her hand moved across the paper with a focus that was total and slightly impersonal. Numbers. Letters cross-referenced with the message header timestamp. A frequency analysis running in the left margin. A cipher wheel sketched from memory in the upper right corner, its segments marked with notations that were shorthand for something she had learned to do a long time ago. At the 5-minute mark, nothing had been decoded. At the 8-minute mark, Maya's hand paused. She looked at what she had written, made 2 small adjustments to the cipher wheel. At 11 minutes and 42 seconds, she typed a long string into the decryption interface and pressed enter. The screen loaded for 3 seconds. Then it resolved into plain text coordinates. Mission parameters, authentication codes. Complete. Accurate. The exercise coordinator's confirmation came back within 90 seconds. The technician stared. "How did you ping?" "Messages decoded," Maya said. "Transmit to the exercise coordinator." She handed the paper to Dane and walked out. Dane stood holding the paper. Both sides. The front was covered in cipher work frequency tables, the shorthand notations of someone who had developed their own private system from years of repetition. The back was blank except for a small mark in the lower right corner. 2 letters and a number. NH7. He didn't know what it meant, but it had the compact quality of a designation and identifier used by people who had agreed in advance on its meaning. He photographed it and sent it to Kellner. "Found this on Reeves's work. Any idea what NH7 means?" Kellner forwarded it to Harmon without comment. Harmon zoomed in on the image. NH7, Night Andromeda 7, Ghost Hawk Intelligence Cell, Operator Specialty, SIGINT, and Cryptographic Operations. Status killed in action, April 14th, 2019. He had known from the kill house footage that Maya Reeves was not what her file said she was. He had known it from the medical kit. He had known it accumulating detail by detail since the moment she walked across the parade ground that first morning. But knowing a thing abstractly and having it confirmed in black text on a screen are different experiences. One is a hypothesis, the other is a weight. He stood at the window and let the weight settle. Then something else surfaced, not from the database, from memory. He was 21 years old recently through BUD/S, assigned to his first operational rotation, a convoy escort on a road outside Aleppo, Syria. He had barely paid attention to the analysts they were transporting. Small, quiet, the kind of person you don't look at twice. Then the road disappeared. The IED was large enough to lift the lead vehicle entirely. Harmon's Humvee went sideways and then over, and the world became noise and heat and disorientation. And when things stopped moving, he was pinned beneath twisted metal, and something was very wrong with his left side, and the smoke was thick and close. Then hands, small hands, working quickly and without panic, finding the pinch points, pulling, adjusting, pulling again, and then cold air replacing the close heat of the cab. A face above him. He couldn't focus on it. A voice. Steady. Not performing steadiness, but actually steady the way people are steady who have been through enough that this registers as manageable. Stay with me. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. He had followed the voice because it was the only fixed point available. He had woken in a field hospital. The analyst was gone. The report listed a civilian contractor, identity redacted. He had put in requests. Both came back empty. He had thought about that voice intermittently for 8 years, not obsessively. But it came back in the quiet moments whenever he heard someone counting breath in a particular cadence. He had heard that cadence 3 days ago on the obstacle course when Maya knelt beside Private Hollis. He stood very still. Then he went to find her. She was on the steps outside the South Barracks at 11 o'clock at night, sitting with her back against the railing, looking up at the sky. Fort Carson sat at 5,000 feet, and on clear nights, the stars were a different proposition than they were at sea level, more numerous and clearer and closer in the way that altitude makes everything feel less insulated from the larger reality of things. She heard him coming. "Commander Harmon." "Captain." He stood at the bottom of the steps. "Mind if I sit down?" She gestured to the space beside her without words. He sat. He didn't say anything immediately. The night was cold and the base was quiet, and the mountains to the west were dark shapes against a slightly lighter dark sky. After a while he said, "Syria, 2018. She waited. "I was 21, he said. "Convoy escort east of Aleppo. We had an analyst with us." He paused. Small, quiet. I didn't pay much attention. Maya was looking at the sky. "The IED took out the lead vehicle," he continued. "My Humvee went over. I was pinned. I was losing blood, and the smoke was bad, and I was fading." He stopped. Then someone pulled me out. The stars were very still. "Small hands," he said, and a voice, steady, telling me to breathe. I woke up in the field hospital. She was gone. Reports said civilian contractor, identity redacted. I put in requests, both came back empty. Maya said, "You were 21 years old." "Yes. Too young to die for someone else's decision." Harmon let that sit. "Why didn't you extract after the hit? You could have taken the intel package and gotten out. That was the mission parameter." She was quiet for long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. "Then because you were still breathing." Her voice was not heavy, not performing anything. It had the flatness of a simple statement, not because it lacked meaning, but because it had so much that adding anything to it would be a reduction. "And Riley Ashford Drummond," she continued, "they were still breathing. For a while." Harmon went still. "The 3 operators," he said. "Ghost Hawk." The coin appeared in her hand. She hadn't reached for it consciously. It was just there the way familiar objects appear in the hands of people who have carried them long enough that the motion lives below thought. "Sergeant First Class Marcus Riley," she said. "Staff Sergeant Dale Ashford. Corporal James Drummond." She said each name with the deliberateness of someone who says names because saying them is a form of keeping them real, a refusal to let them become abstract, to let them become a file entry. "They died on April 14th, 2019, she said. "On a mission we were 48 hours from completing. Victor Sorokin was in range. The operation was sound. The intelligence was confirmed. She paused. And then the abort order came. Denton, Harmon said. Denton. How long have you been carrying this? She looked at the coin. 3 names worn shallow with years of handling, but still readable. Since the day they didn't come home. The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't need to be filled. The kind that is itself a form of communication between people who understand that certain things can be said by saying nothing. Harmon said, I've been trying to find who pulled me out of that Humvee for 8 years. Maya turned to look at him for the first time in the conversation. You turned out all right, she said. I'm glad. He laughed once briefly, not because it was funny, but because sometimes the gap between what a moment is and what you expected it to be produces a sound that comes out resembling laughter. I need you to understand something, he said. Whatever you're here for, whatever you're building toward Kellner, and I have seen enough to know which side of it we're on. Maya was quiet for a moment, then she put the coin back in her pocket and stood. Get some sleep, Commander, she said. She went inside. Harmon sat on the cold steps for a while longer looking at the mountains. That same night, Kellner had the footage from the parade ground on the monitor in his quarters, the morning footage, the angle that caught Maya's back when Thorne pulled the collar. He had been looking at it for a long time. He zoomed in. The resolution was adequate. The image of the tattoo was clear. He looked at the bird. He had been looking at birds like this in one form or another for 32 years. He had not seen this particular one, but he understood the language it was written in. He opened a voice channel to Harmon. Come look at this. Harmon was there in 4 minutes. Kellner pointed at the screen. The beak. The hawk's beak turned to the left. Left-facing beak in this design language designates Syria theater. There's a visual grammar to unit tattoos for black operations. Most people can't read it, but I've been around long enough. He moved the cursor. Look at the wingtips. The tips of both wings were folded slightly inward, a subtle variation from the standard spread. Folded wingtips, redacted status, meaning the operator's record has been officially sealed. He zoomed further. And the text at the base of the wings, small but readable, 07 Sigma. The words settled in the cold air of the room. That's a mission designator, Harmon said. Operation designator, Kellner corrected. 07 Sigma was the internal code for the Sorokin interdiction operation, Syria 2019. He leaned back. She's been wearing the evidence on her back since the day she walked through the gate, and nobody read it because nobody knew what they were looking at. Harmon said quietly, she chose to put it there, on her back, where she can't see it herself, but everyone behind her can. That's not accident, Kellner said. That's intention. Neither of them slept much that night. The extraction drill was scheduled for 0800. Denton had assembled the scenario himself with assistance from Major Prescott Vane, who handled the administrative machinery of base operations and who had been receiving wire transfers from a holding company in Luxembourg for 3 years. The scenario was simple on paper. A team would enter a warehouse structure on the Eastern Training Range, locate a high-value target in an orange vest, and extract. Enemy role players would provide resistance, simunition rounds, controlled conditions. What the briefing did not say, Sorokin's network had sent Denton a message 48 hours earlier. Ghost Hawk has an active operator at Fort Carson. You know what happens if this gets to the surface. Handle it. Denton had made a phone call. And by the time the extraction drill was scheduled, 3 of the role players assigned to the warehouse scenario were carrying hard rubber baton rounds. Non-lethal at 50 feet, capable of breaking bones at 10. A warehouse is not 50 feet. Maya assembled with the team at 0755. Thorne was there along with Private First Class Novak and Specialist Barrett. The briefing was standard. Enter through the main door, clear 3 rooms, locate the HVT, extract via the north exit. They entered the warehouse at 0802. The first problem was the layout. It did not match the floor plan. An extra corridor ran off the main entry, and the staircase shown as absent was present, and the light conditions were darker than a standard drill setup because 2 overhead fixtures had been removed. Thorne called the adjustment. They moved deeper. First room clear. Second room, 2 role players went down quickly. But more appeared from the extra corridor, far more than light resistance. 6, then 8. Novak took hits to the chest marked dead. Barrett went down. Thorne took a round in the shoulder, functional but limited. The team's options compressed rapidly. Maya checked her radio. Static. Complete blanket. Jammed. She looked at the room, at the role players closing in, at the absence of any angle that resolved cleanly. And then she looked at the closest role player and she saw his hands, the tension in his grip. the specific alertness of someone who is not performing resistance but providing it. She looked at the rounds in his marking weapon. They were the wrong color. Simunition rounds were blue. These were black. Hard rubber. This was not a training scenario. Thorne had seen it too. She knew because he had moved 2 steps to her left without being asked, putting himself between her and the nearest role player. He was looking at her with an expression that was asking a question he didn't know how to voice. She answered it by reaching to her vest. The secondary radio sat on her left hip beneath the plate carrier. Not visible unless you knew to look. She had carried it every day since she arrived because preparation is not pessimism. It is arithmetic. She keyed the transmitter. Her voice changed. The hesitance was gone. The slight flatness she had used as cover for 4 weeks. The performance of a desk officer trying to fit in. All of it left her voice at once cleanly and completely, the way a coat comes off when you reach a room warm enough. What remained was flat and precise and calibrated with the authority of someone who has given orders in environments where those orders either worked or people died. Night Andromeda 7 to Overwatch. Request immediate extract. Grid November Whiskey 4721. 5 Personnel 1 HVT. Authenticate Tango Hotel November. Static. Then a voice. Calm. Unsurprised. Night Andromeda 7 authentication confirmed. QRF inbound. ETA 90 seconds. She dropped the radio and took position beside Thorne. The role players hesitated, not because of anything she said, because of the way she was standing. The performance had ended. What they were looking at now was something else entirely, and they did not have instructions for it. 90 seconds. The north door opened. 4 figures came through it in the space of 2 seconds. No unit markings, no base insignia. Full tactical gear at a level above standard military issue. They moved through the warehouse the way water moves through a corridor, filling the available space and clearing it simultaneously. One located the HVT, 2 others covered the role players. The 4th came to Maya's position, looked at her, and gave a single nod that contained more information than a paragraph. The role players had stopped moving. One of them said in a voice that had lost most of its certainty, "This is supposed to be a training drill." The lead operator said, "Drill is concluded. Clear the area." They filed out. The 4 figures collected the HVT and were through the north door in 20 seconds. Thorne stood in the middle of the empty warehouse. Who were they? Joint Special Operations Command, Maya said. Quick Reaction Force. You called them with a radio you weren't supposed to have. I called them with a frequency I've been authorized to use for 11 years. She looked at him without heat, without performance. Someone put live rubber rounds in this drill. This stopped being a training scenario before we walked through the door. Thorne looked at the floor, at the marks where the rubber rounds had impacted the concrete wall. He said, I know who gave the order. I know you do, she said. We need to debrief. He followed her out. In the observation booth, Harmon and Kellner watched the footage in silence. The moment Maya keyed the secondary radio, the moment her voice changed, the arrival of the QRF, the 47 words she had spoken in a voice no one on this base had heard her use before. Night Andromeda 7, Harmon said very quietly, that call sign was decommissioned in 2019. On the screen, Maya walked out of the warehouse into the thin morning light. She looked up at the observation camera. She had known where the cameras were since the first day. She looked at it for 2 seconds. Then she smiled. Not warmly, not triumphantly. The smile of a person who has set something in motion a long time ago and has just watched it reach the place it was always going. Harmon picked up his phone. It was time to make 3 calls. The lockdown order went through the button at 1100 hours without announcement. One moment the installation was operating at its ordinary mid-morning rhythm. The next security personnel were at the gates and non-essential staff were being directed to their quarters, and the communications center had gone to restricted access. Something had happened. Something real. Garrett Thorne had been waiting for this. He had spent the hour after the warehouse walking back through 4 weeks of orders he had followed or without questioning the parade ground, the gear assignments, the coordinated campaign to isolate and discredit a person he had never once actually looked at. He had been given a narrative about her, and he had accepted it because it was easier than the alternative, because the man providing it outranked him, because going along is always the path of least resistance. He was done with the path of least resistance. He squared his shoulders and walked toward the command center, because whatever came next, he was going to be on the right side of it. The briefing room held 7 people, and the temperature had nothing to do with the climate control. General Sandra Calloway sat at the head of the table, 54 years old, gray hair pulled back without ceremony. 2 Purple Hearts, 3 combat deployments. The kind of record that does not require a person to perform authority because the authority is already present and understood by everyone in the room. Harmon and Kellner stood to her left. 2 JAG investigators sat along the right wall with laptops open and expressions carefully neutral. A legal officer occupied the far corner. And there was Denton. He had been escorted to the room without explanation, which meant he had arrived already calibrating, organizing his responses, constructing the version of events he could defend. He sat with the posture of a senior officer attending a briefing, hands on the table, face arranged in the expression of a man who has nothing to conceal and finds the implication otherwise mildly irritating. He had been in rooms like this before. You stayed calm, you managed the information. You gave away nothing that wasn't already in their hands. What he did not know was how much was already in their hands. Calloway spoke first without preamble. Colonel Denton, are you familiar with the Ghost Hawk intelligence cell? Something moved behind his eyes, a small shift quickly managed. Vaguely, Syria Theater several years ago, the operation was aborted. Aborted, Calloway said. Yes, on April 12, 2019. 48 hours before Ghost Hawk was positioned to execute the capture of Viktor Sorokin. The abort order came through, signed by you. The operation was compromised, Denton said. Intelligence indicated enemy forces had been alerted to our presence. I made the call to pull out. Standard procedure. 3 operators died during the extraction, Calloway said, because air support was withdrawn without prior notification to the team, because exfiltration assets were redirected with a 2-hour window the team could not meet. Denton's jaw tightened. Operational decisions under those. The supporting documentation for your intelligence assessment, Calloway continued as though he had not spoken, does not exist. No source, no signal intercept, no human intelligence report. You listed intel compromise as the reason, but there is no record of what intelligence indicated what to whom. My sources were confidential. I was not required. Harmon placed a single sheet of paper on the table and pushed it toward the center. Financial records, specifically a wire transfer dated April 10, 2019. 2 days before your abort order, $200,000 deposited to a holding company registered in Delaware. The parent organization has been traced through 4 intermediary entities to a network of financial instruments associated with Viktor Sorokin's arms procurement operation. Denton looked at the paper. He did not touch it. Circumstantial, he said. The connection you're drawing requires assumptions at every step. The transfer routing code, Harmon said, matches exactly with deposits made to 3 other officers who were subsequently convicted of selling classified operational information. Same network, same routing structure, same timing pattern payment made 48 to 72 hours before a mission abort or compromise. The room was very still. Calloway set a small recording device on the table. She pressed play. Denton's voice came through the speaker, clear and unmistakable. Captain Reeves needs to be gone. I don't care how you do it. Reassign her, fail her out, make her existence here miserable until she requests transfer. Just get her out of my camp. A pause, then Vane's voice. Sir, if I may ask why the urgency, she hasn't created any real problems yet. Denton again, because if she stays, people will start asking questions. And I cannot afford questions right now. Calloway stopped the recording. That conversation took place 4 days after Captain Reeves arrived at Fort Carson, she said, before she had done anything that could justify administrative concern. The only reason to want her removed immediately upon arrival is if you already knew who she was, which means you knew Ghost Hawk had sent someone, which means you knew why. Denton sat with the stillness of a man performing stillness. Then he leaned back and smiled, thin, cold, not triumphant, something more specific. The smile of a man who has decided that if the room is going to burn, he intends to participate in the lighting. Vane deleted your server backup 2 hours ago, he said. Your digital records, the transfers, the communications logs, the mirror files all gone. Whatever you think you have, you're looking at a paper record and a single audio file, neither of which satisfies a military tribunal. He looked at Calloway. You know how these cases work. You know what sufficient evidence means. The room absorbed this. Harmon looked at Maya. She was sitting at the far end of the table. She had been sitting there since the briefing began, quiet and still. In the way she was always quiet and still, not waiting for her turn to speak, but present in the way of someone who arrived at their destination some time ago. She opened her laptop. She typed an address into the browser, a long string of characters that resolved to nothing on the public internet. She entered a 24-character authentication code from memory without checking anything, the way you enter a combination you have used enough times that your fingers know it before your mind does. The screen loaded, and then it was all there. Wire transfers, communication logs, email chains between Denton and Vane stretching back 3 years, financial records linking the Delaware holding company to the Sorokin network through every intermediary step. Audio files, not just the one Calloway had played, but 11 others recorded across 4 weeks of carefully managed interaction. The abort order from April 2019 with metadata showing it had been manually backdated. The message Denton had received from the Sorokin network 48 hours before he ordered the rubber rounds into the warehouse drill. Everything. Complete. Intact. Time-stamped and authenticated. Denton stared at the screen. Maya said the base server backup was one of 4 locations where this data was mirrored. The others are JSOC, secure storage, a classified DoD repository, and a third-party forensic archive. All 3 updated automatically every 6 hours from the moment I arrived at Fort Carson. She looked at him without heat, without satisfaction, with the flat directness of someone completing a task. I knew you would use Vane to clear the base records. I arranged for that to be irrelevant from day one. She paused. I knew because that is what frightened people do. They erase the evidence they can see and forget about the evidence they never knew existed. The 2 JAG investigators were already working. Vane was escorted from an adjacent room where he had been waiting under guard. The handcuffs made a specific sound in the quiet that was different from the other sounds in the room. Denton did not look at Vane. He was looking at the screen, at the weight of what was on it, at 4 years of careful compartmentalization dissolving in the space of a laptop screen loading. He had been a good officer once. He had made decisions in dark places, and some of those decisions had cost lives, and he had carried them the way soldiers carry things they can never put down. That was a story that could be understood even when it could not be excused. And then one phone call had turned him into something different. Not because he was evil, because he was afraid. Because the gap between what he had done and what he was willing to let people know he had done was wide enough that he had paid to keep it dark, and the payments had accumulated interest until they owned him. He understood, sitting at that table with the handcuffs waiting, that there was no path back to before the phone call. There was only what came after it. There was only what he had chosen each time in the spaces where he had told himself the choice was small enough not to count. Calloway stood. Colonel Marcus Denton, you are relieved of command, effective immediately pending formal charges, including selling classified operational intelligence, dereliction of duty, resulting in the deaths of 3 United States service members, criminal conspiracy, and attempted harm to a federal officer during the conduct of an authorized investigation. She looked at the security officer at the door. Take him. They let him out. The door closed. Silence filled the briefing room. Then Calloway looked at the 2 JAG investigators. 3 operators, she said. Ghost Hawk Intelligence Cell. I want their full records unsealed and prepared for formal commendation. Families notified. Ceremony scheduled within 30 days. She looked at Maya. Their names should have been spoken a long time ago. We're going to fix that. Calloway spent the next hour with the JAG team building the case that would travel from Fort Carson to a military tribunal, and from there to consequences that would bear the names of Denton and Vane and several others whose names were encoded in the financial records being processed at 3 separate secure locations. She paused at one point and looked at the monitor on the far wall. The warehouse footage. The moment Maya keyed the secondary radio. The moment the QRF came through the north door. She watched it once beginning to end. Then she opened the Ghost Hawk file that had been sealed for 6 years and read the records of the operators lost on April 14th, 2019. Not the short versions, the complete records, the ones that told you who a person actually was. Sergeant First Class Marcus Riley from Knoxville, Tennessee. 14 years of service. Expert marksman. The kind of NCO who made the people around him better simply by requiring more of himself. He had a daughter named Claire who was now 13 years old and who had grown up with a folded flag and a photograph on the mantle. Staff Sergeant Dale Ashford from a small town in western Montana. 11 years of service. Demolition specialist. He had taught himself to cook on his kind of deployment because the food was poor and morale was poor, and he had decided those were problems he could actually solve. The people who served with him remembered him for his cooking as much as for anything else. Corporal James Drummond, 6 years of service, signal specialist, 24 years old when he died. 6 weeks from the end of his rotation. He had a pocket Spanish dictionary found in his gear after the mission, the pages soft from handling, because he had plans after his service ended, and he was the kind of man who prepared for the things he intended to do. Calloway closed the file. She sat with it for a moment, not with the detachment of a general reviewing records, but with the particular weight that belongs to anyone who has sent people into places they did not come back from and has to live in the arithmetic of that. Then she picked up her phone and called the JAG office. I want a formal commendation ceremony scheduled for the Ghost Hawk operators within 30 days. She said, full honors, records unsealed and entered into the official archive. Families notified and invited. Their names should have been spoken a long time ago. Thorne found Maya in the corridor outside the briefing room. He had been waiting there for 40 minutes. He stood straight when she came out. Not at attention in the military sense, not performing the gesture, but inhabiting its actual intention, which is the intention of a person presenting themselves honestly without the protection of posture or deflection. Captain Reeves, she stopped and looked at him. I tore your shirt off in front of 60 people, he said. I did it because I was told to and because I thought it was funny and because I didn't ask any of the questions I should have asked about why I was being told to do it. He held her gaze. There is no version of that where I was just following orders. I'm a grown man who made a choice, and I'm sorry. Maya looked at him for a longer moment, not assessing him, just seeing him. You went back to the warehouse, she said. When you understood what the rubber rounds meant, you moved to cover me. That's not a trade, he said. That doesn't balance anything. No, she agreed. It doesn't. She looked at him steadily. You followed the orders of a man who had rank and authority and 30 years of decorated service. The machinery of this institution told you he was trustworthy. Most people in that position make the same choice because the institution is exactly what it's designed to prevent you from questioning. She paused. That is the real problem I came here to fix, not you specifically. The machine that made that choice feel obvious. Thorne was quiet. Will you testify, she said. Everything, he said. Every order, every conversation, the warehouse, all of it. She nodded. Then you've already done what matters. She walked down the corridor. He stood there for a while after she was gone. He did not feel absolved, which was appropriate, but he felt something adjacent to it, the specific quality of a man who has decided what he is going to do next and has stopped arguing with himself about whether he is the kind of person who does it. Harmon found Maya in the parking area outside the South Barracks. It was late afternoon. The mountains to the west were catching the last direct light, and the long shadows of the Rockies were beginning to extend across the base, turning the parade ground from concrete gray to something cooler and more forgiving. She was standing beside a vehicle with a kit bag at her feet. She had already packed. Ramstein, he said. She turned. How did you know? Because Denton was a customer, he said. Someone was selling. You don't burn the distribution network by arresting the man who bought from it. She looked at the mountains. There are 3 people at Ramstein Air Base, she said. Logistics officers, financial administrators. They've been moving Sorokin's money through NATO procurement channels for 4 years. Defense contracts, supply chain payments. Clean on the surface. Untraceable without the financial records Denton's network just gave us. How long will you be gone? She didn't answer, which was itself an answer. Harmon looked at the kit bag, at the vehicle, at her. When I was 21 years old and I was bleeding out in that Humvee, he said, I remember the moment I thought it was finished. I wasn't afraid. I had signed up, knowing the risk, and I had made my peace with it, the way young men do when they haven't yet fully understood exactly what they're giving up. He paused. And then you were there, and you said 4 words. Maya waited. Not today, not on my watch. She was quiet. I've thought about those words for 8 years, he said. I used to think you were saying them to me, a promise to a wounded kid who needed one. But I've been watching you for 4 weeks, and I think I was wrong. He looked at her. You were saying them to yourself every time. That's how you keep going. That's how you stand on a parade ground and let someone tear your shirt and breathe through it without giving them a single thing. Because underneath all of it, you're still saying those 4 words, not today, not on my watch. Maya looked at the mountains for a long time. Then she said, they almost got me in the warehouse. If the QRF authentication had taken 30 seconds longer. But it didn't. No, she turned to face him. But I want you to know that there were moments in the last 4 weeks that cost something. Not the parade ground, the nights, the names, the distance between who I had to appear to be, and she stopped, started again. I want that on record somewhere, even if just here. Harmon said, "Understood, it's on record." She picked up the kit bag. "Calloway offered you the SERE instructor position," he said. "She did. And there are 3 people at Ramstein," Maya said. He nodded. He had expected this answer. He had also hoped in the private part of himself that still carried the weight of a cold road outside Aleppo and a voice counting breath in the dark for a different one. But expectation and hope are different instruments, and he was old enough to know which one was reliable. "When it's done," he said. "When the network is burned and the money is recovered, and the names are on paper in a room where someone with authority has to read them when that's done, I want you to take 60 days. Somewhere that doesn't require a secondary radio." She almost smiled. "You sound like someone who has earned the right to give that advice. I've been sitting in rooms like that briefing room since I was 21 years old." She extended her hand. He shook it. The grip was what it was, not a performance, not a softening. 2 people who had been through a specific kind of fire on separate roads that had arrived at the same place, acknowledging each other honestly. "Not today," he said. "Not on my watch," she said. She put the kit bag in the vehicle. Then she stopped, reached into her chest pocket, took out the coin and held it in her palm, looking down at it. At the bird on one face, wings spread, beak left, talons open. At the 3 names on the other face, worn shallow but readable. Riley, Ashford, Drummond. She looked at the names for a long moment, not with grief exactly, not anymore, but with the specific quality of a person who carries the dead the way a compass carries its needle, not as a burden, but as a direction. She put the coin back in her chest pocket. She got in the vehicle and drove toward the gate. Kellner was at his window at 0430 when the headlights appeared in the parking area below. He had made coffee, which he held in both hands against the cold coming through the window frame, and he was thinking about nothing in particular when the lights moved across the lot toward the gate. For the gate opened, the vehicle stopped. He watched as the driver's door opened. Maya stepped out. She walked to the perimeter fence and stood there for a moment, looking out at the dark scrubland that descended toward the highway. The mountains were invisible in the pre-dawn dark, but she looked in their direction anyway. She stood there for perhaps 30 seconds. He did not know what she was thinking. He had known many soldiers in 32 years, and he had learned that the things soldiers carry in their last moments before departure are private in a way that deserves respect. Then she turned, got back in the vehicle, and the gate opened, and the headlights moved through it and turned east toward the highway. Kellner raised his coffee cup. He held it there until the taillights were gone behind the tree line. Then he drank standing at the cold window, thinking about 32 years in uniform and the particular quality of people who do not stop. He thought that quality was either the best or the most terrible thing about human beings, and probably it was both simultaneously, and that was perhaps the only honest answer to the question of what it costs to be the kind of person who keeps going. He thought about the 3 operators whose names would be spoken at a ceremony in 30 days, in a room full of people who finally knew what had happened to them. He thought that justice taking 6 years was too long. He also thought that justice arriving at all was not something to take for granted. He set down his cup and turned from the window. There was work to do. There was always work to do. On the highway south toward the airfield, Maya drove at a consistent speed in the early blue light before sunrise. The coin was in her chest pocket. She could feel its weight against her sternum, small, worn the specific gravity of something carried long enough to feel like part of the body. She had held it at the fence before she drove through the gate, had looked out at the dark and said 3 names quietly into the Colorado air, the way she always said them, not because saying them changed anything, but because saying them was a form of refusal. A refusal to let them become abstract. A refusal to let them become only a file entry, only a date, only a designation in a database that had spent 6 years telling the world they were gone and forgotten. They were not forgotten. She touched the outside of the chest pocket once briefly. Then she put both hands on the wheel and drove. The mountains were behind her now, their shapes diminishing in the mirror. Ahead, the sky was beginning to change at the horizon, that specific gray that comes before any color arrives when the darkness is not yet gone, but the light has begun to make its argument. Not sunrise, the announcement of it. The promise that it was coming, regardless of what the dark had to say about the matter. Ramstein Air Base. 3 names. A financial network that had been operating behind the machinery of legitimate defense contracts, invisible because it was designed to be invisible, because the people who built it had counted on the assumption that no one would look closely enough for long enough to find the seams. They had been right about almost everyone. She had a flight boarding in 90 minutes. She had an email with their 3 names and a mission that did not officially exist. She had a coin in her chest pocket with 3 names on the back. She had 11 years of experience in environments where the margin between a decision and its consequences was measured in seconds, and she had learned in those environments that the most important thing you carry into any situation is not equipment or intelligence or tactical advantage. It is the clarity of knowing why you are there. She knew why she was there. Marcus Riley had had a daughter named Claire who was 13 years old and growing up with a folded flag. Dale Ashford had never gotten to open the restaurant he'd talked about on the long watches in Syria. James Drummond had a Spanish dictionary with soft pages and plans he had been preparing for, and a life he had not gotten to live. They had not died so their names could sit sealed in a database for 6 years. They had not died so the man who sold them could retire to a comfortable pension. They had not died so the network that paid for the selling could keep operating, keep moving money through legitimate channels, keep purchasing the cooperation of people who were supposed to protect the ones they were sending into the field. She was not done. She would not be done until the last account was settled, until the last transfer was traced, until the last name was on paper in a room where someone with authority had to read it and answer for it. This was not vengeance. Vengeance is a fire that consumes the person carrying it as readily as its target. This was something colder and more durable. This was accountability, the specific, unglamorous patient work of making systems answer for what they do when they believe no one is watching. She had learned in 11 years of operating in the dark that systems believe no one is watching almost all of the time. That is not arrogance on their part. It is history. For most of history, for most of the people ground up by the machinery of institutions, no one was watching, or if they were watching, they had no way to make the watching matter. She had a way to make it matter. The highway was empty at this hour. One set of headlights on a road moving through the flat country at the base of the mountains and the stillness of the pre-dawn carrying the quality of a held breath, the world in the moment before it decided what the day would be. The sky kept lightening. Behind her, Fort Carson receded into the dark. 60 people who had stood in the cold and watched a woman be diminished and had understood nothing about what they were watching. A colonel who had spent 4 years believing that fear was a reasonable substitute for integrity. A system that had allowed both things to coexist for longer than they should have. The system was changing. Slowly, imperfectly. The way systems change when people who know where the seams are apply enough consistent pressure in the right places. That was enough. It did not have to be fast. It did not have to be loud. It did not have to look the way justice looked in stories. It just had to be real, and it had to be documented, and it had to be impossible to unsee once it had been seen. She touched the chest pocket again. Riley, Ashford, Drummond. Not today, she thought, not on my watch. The horizon brightened. The first suggestion of color appeared at the eastern edge of the sky, not yet sunrise, but the announcement of it. Behind her, the mountains. Ahead, the airfield, and beyond that, an ocean. And beyond that, Ramstein. And beyond that, 3 names and the next piece of what had started 6 years ago on a road in Syria when someone made a phone call and decided that 4 lives were an acceptable cost. They were not an acceptable cost. She pressed the accelerator slightly, and the landscape moved faster past the windows, the flat scrubland giving way to the first low buildings of the approach to the airfield. And the sky above was no longer fully dark and no longer quite gray, but something in between, the specific color of a world in the act of deciding what it was going to be. Ghost Hawk kept moving, the way it had always moved, without announcement, without ceremony, without the need for anyone to be watching. Low and quiet and patient and absolutely relentless in the direction of what needed to be done, carrying its dead like a compass that only points in one direction, forward, always forward.